All right, so the flood. So if you've ever looked at any scientific, quote-unquote, debunking of the flood, one of the things that they'll talk about, it takes heat to take water to steam or to water in the air. So to get water from being liquid to gas takes energy input. Well, it also happens to be that when a cloud, when water in the air condenses, it gives off that heat. So it's called the latent heat of evaporation. If you've for those that remember that from chemistry or physical science. So the problem that most scientists will raise is that if we had the amount of water that would need to take the flood the whole world, if that were in the sky and it all condensed and fell to the ground during this time, the heat given off by that event would have just burned up the whole world. And you can do calculations, and they're probably right on that. But they're overlooking the text of the story, right? So the first question is, where did all the water come from? And kind of a joint question, how long did it stay? So let's just go to the text. Genesis 7, we're going to skip around, starting in verse 11. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, that's important, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day, all the fountains of the deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were open. So we see two sources of water. The fountains of the deep burst open, and then also the floodgates of the sky were open. Verse 12, the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. 24, the water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. 150 days, that's almost half of a year. Okay, just keep our context in. Genesis 8:1, but God remembered Noah and all the beasts of the cattle that were with him in the ark. And God caused the wind to pass over the earth, and the water subsided. Also the fountains of the deep and the floodgates of the sky were closed, and the rain from the sky was restrained, and the water receded steadily from the earth, and at the end of 150 days the water decreased. Now, this is not a science text or a math text, it's a history text. So I'm sitting here, I'm trying to make sense of when was the water rising, when did it kind of stay stationary, when did it start going down, how long was there when the floodgates or the fountains of the deep burst open. That speaks of some huge geological something going on. And my reading of this tends me to think that stuff was going on for around 150 days, right? And to me, I think the water was going up and or staying steady for around 150 days before it started going back down. So we have 6 months of the earth, the water increasing in height and or staying the same before it starts to go back down. So then if we pick up there in verse 4 of chapter 8, in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested upon the mountains of Ararat. So we started this in the 2nd month. We're in the 7th month. The water decreased steadily until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains became visible. Verse 13, now it came about in the 601st year, in the 1st month, on the 1st of the month, the water was dried up from the earth. So now we're in the 1st month, and the water was dried up from the earth. And I'm guessing from this that there was no standing water, but it was probably pretty squishy still, because when we read the next verse, it says, in the 2nd month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. So there was no visible water to Noah on the first day of the 1st month, but it was probably still muddy. Maybe this is a good example of what it was like.
That's 375 days.
Right, so a year. So 6 months of great turmoil and 6 months of it kind of all going down. And 10 more days of this event. The majority of the water probably came from some place underneath the ground. And we don't know what the geology of the earth was at that point in time, but I don't think it was like it is today. For several reasons. God said it didn't rain before then. And we have this bursting up of the some cavern or some reservoir of water.
It'd be like a universal Yellowstone.
Right. just multitudes of geysers, volcanic activity, earthquakes. Adrian?
You remember in the Bible it tells you that the water, it never rained. The earth was taken care of from the water underneath.
Right.
And it came up. So there was some form of water underneath.
Right. There's some way that God watered the earth from underneath, and wherever this mechanism was is no longer and was destroyed during the flood.
Somebody was a vapor canopy, the atmosphere being so thick that pterodactyls could fly in it, and just a very thick moisture in the atmosphere that let loose and came down at the same time.
Yeah, there is Jackson's mentioning a vapor canopy, and while none of us were there, that is not as likely as just a lot of the water being sequestered underneath the ground, because while water to us is clear, that's in the visible light range. If you and I saw in infrared light or ultraviolet light or microwave light, it would look like India ink, because it's a pretty good absorber of energy, except for miraculously during the visible light where we see. I don't know if there's something going on there in how that all got started off. And we're going to read Psalm 104 at the end, if time permits. Maybe not, because I'm looking like we're getting close to time. But read through Psalm 104. That will be your homework. I didn't have any homework, but read through it. Because it may detail creation, but after reading through it again in the light of the flood and seeing the action verbs attributed to God there and how He raised up the mountains and put the sea in their place so they'd no longer be, I think that's what happened. I think we have geologic, because if we just started shoveling dirt into the sea, we could make this globe just one big ocean, right? And so God, I believe, miraculously, through major geological things during the flood, lifted up our continents to where they are today. There were probably one single continent before then. So
you go by that theory that it was one single continent before that.
Yeah, I do. And I believe during the flood that was done away with. That's what I think. But all right, so how large was the ark? Genesis 6:15 says, "This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits." So we have a little scale here, and you see the ark down here at the bottom. You see some ships of our time. So the ark was probably half to a little bit over half the size of the Titanic. That's a big boat. And this is about pushing the limits with our known construction practices of wooden boats. But we have evidence of the Greeks building wooden boats of this size. So we know it can be done from extra biblical areas. So there's no argument that a boat of that size could be made from wood. Could Noah have built the ark? Well, Adam was made perfect, right? And then he sinned. And we have to assume that a great amount of intelligence was given to Adam. Some people subscribe to airplanes and stuff. I don't know. I just don't know. But between Adam and Noah, men were able to form metal and make complex musical instruments. We know that. And Noah's people would have had more technology than the ancient peoples right after the flood. And the ancient peoples right after the flood had technology to build the ark. So we've got to assume that Noah had the technology to build the ark. And I think it's a fairly commonsensical thing to think. Was the ark big enough?
Oh, yes.
In the book Noah's Ark, a feasibility study, creationist researcher John, you can pronounce that last name, suggested that at most 16,000 animals were all that would be needed to preserve the kinds created that God brought into the ark. Now, I'm going to summarize this. Basically, he's saying you don't have to bring a German Shepherd and a Poodle and a Great Dane. You can just bring one dog of each sex, or 7 if they're clean. Because our DNA, remember we talked about that a couple weeks ago, if you get diverse DNA, you can have all the information for all those different sub-kinds for different types of horses, different types of cows, etc. So you don't need a Arabian and a paint, and so I'm saying you can just have one of each. And so that's what's there.